Hi, my name is Meredith Polsky. I'm a founder of Matan, a Jewish organization that aims to help make Jewish education more accessible to children with special needs. I currently serve as the Director of Training and Advocacy, and I will be presenting understanding the challenges and benefits of inclusion in Jewish education. So in order to really understand where we are as a Jewish community, it's really important to recognize the history of special education law in the secular realm. So just to run through that really quickly, it dates back to 1973, which is not such a super long time ago. And the Rehabilitation Act was first introduced. And this was really the first time that we're talking about the notion of equal access to people with disabilities. And this was done through the removal of architectural, employment, and transportation barriers. Section 504 of this act specifically prohibited discrimination on the basis of physical or mental handicaps in programs receiving federal funds. So programs receiving federal funds indicates that this does not necessarily apply to religious institutions. In 1975, just a couple years later, we had the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. People in the field will often refer to this as PL 94142. And this encompassed four things, many of which we still talk a lot about today. The first is a free and appropriate education. The second is non-discriminatory identification and evaluation. The third is the idea of the Individualized Education Plan, or IEP. And the fourth is the idea of the Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE. That last one was particularly important because basically what was happening before that in public schools was that anybody with any kind of disability was basically lumped into one classroom. So you might have kids with hearing loss or vision loss grouped together with kids with cognitive disabilities or developmental delays, just all in one classroom. And that really didn't work for anybody. So the least restrictive environment says that whatever the highest level a student is capable of achieving, that's where they need to be, even if it's just for part of their day. So for example, if a student struggles with academic tasks like math and reading, but it's fine to be mainstreamed for, let's say, PE and lunch and recess and music, then they must be mainstreamed for those subjects and receive their special education services for the academic subjects. So in 1990, we passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and this made some really important changes to the pre-existing laws. First, it changed the name of handicapped children to children with disabilities. And we try now in everything that we write and say to always make sure that the person is first, right? We're not going to talk about learning disabled children. We're going to talk about children with learning disabilities. We're not going to talk about autistic kids. We're going to talk about kids with autism. It's really important that we always use person-first language, understanding that we are all much more than just one thing that defines us. We're people first, and then our characteristics and qualities come second. IDEA also extended the laws to offer services starting with toddlers through adult stable employment. So it had a much wider span of services. It included requirements for parent-student participation in educational decisions, and it added safeguards to ensure honest communication and to protect individual rights. So I want to frame this issue a bit in the context of Jewish education. While no study specifically has been done on the Jewish population in terms of disabilities, we can assume that Jewish statistics reflect the national statistics on disabilities. And that is to say that about 15 to 20% of all students struggle with some sort of learning issue. One in now as many as 68 children in the United States are diagnosed with autism, and close to 1 million children in the United States are Jewish. So we're really talking about 200,000 children who struggle with some type of learning issue or developmental delay in the Jewish community. So, what are the implications of these statistics and these evolving laws for the Jewish community? Well, there are a lot of implications, right? First of all, we know that the Jewish community lags behind the secular world when it comes to inclusion. But what we sometimes don't think about is that a child with special needs has a drastic effect on how the entire family is included in Jewish life. There's so much emphasis now placed on unaffiliated Jews and how we can engage them. But we also need to recognize that the families of 200,000 children may have their nose pressed against the window wanting to be included, and they've been rejected or they've been inadequately supported in Jewish education. And because the secular laws have become so expansive, parents really don't understand why they can get so many services in the public realm, but don't get any type of similar service in the Jewish realm. So we talk about the idea that inclusion in Jewish education is not a legal mandate, but I would argue that it is a moral mandate, right? Parents fight all day long to get services for their children in the secular environment. And truth be told, when they get to the Jewish environment, they don't feel like they should fight. They feel that Jewish inclusion is their child's birthright, is their family's birthright, and they're tired of fighting. So when we talk about inclusion in the Jewish community, we think about it in a few different ways. Inclusion gives all learners equal access to the educational program. But it doesn't just welcome them in and hope for the best. It also delivers proper support in an effective manner based on those learners. And it creates an environment that welcomes open and honest communication about learning. So we want families to feel comfortable sharing about their children, but in order to do that, we need to be sending a message that we're ready to hear that from parents and that it's not going to result in them being turned away from Jewish education. So we can think about this idea as a Jewish professional. What do you think about inclusion in your own classrooms or camps or synagogues, or the need to adapt lessons for all learners? What are your concerns? What are your fears? Studies show that classrooms that are comprised of diverse learners are beneficial for students with and without special needs. And again, I want to emphasize that we're not asking professionals to keep their current structure and add in children with special needs. We need to make sure that teachers and administrators get the proper kind of training in order to be successful. But given that, when we practice inclusion, it does benefit everybody in the room. So generally speaking, according to all the studies, inclusive education is at least as good and actually appears to be better than separate settings for all students. Diverse learners can meet individual needs working together, which is a very Jewish concept, right? The idea of chavruta style learning and peer learning is a very Jewish concept. And parents and teachers' reports of their experience are positive as well. So, of course, before we do anything new, there's apprehension and there's fear around it. So, before embarking on inclusion, most parents and teachers express a level of concern. But once they do it, they really see the benefits of it. This is the research that shows what we've just been talking about, right? Three main points. The performance of students without disabilities is not compromised by the presence of students with disabilities. And typical students derive benefits from their involvement and relationships, perhaps more importantly, with students with disabilities. And lastly, the presence of students with disabilities provides a catalyst for learning opportunities and experiences that might not otherwise be part of the curriculum. And again, these are also very Jewish concepts. We want our Jewish children to understand that everybody plays an equal part in our Jewish world. So we know, like I said before, that everybody's fearful or worried about things that they haven't tried before. But the only way to actually impact that is by having actual experience with inclusion. So the benefits for typical learners, inclusion provides opportunities to experience diversity of society and most importantly, of the Jewish community. It develops an appreciation that everyone has unique abilities, and it develops sensitivity, respect, and empathy. And finally, inclusion develops feelings of empowerment and the ability to make a difference. And when we look at all of these benefits in the context of the Jewish community, I don't think anybody would argue that these are all attributes we want our children to have. Inclusion is often a tougher sell for the adults of our community than for the children. The earlier we can start with inclusion for kids, the more successful we're going to be. It's part and parcel of their Jewish life. Kids with special needs are their friends. They expect them to be in their classrooms. But inclusion benefits us as Jewish professionals and our adult peers in our community as well. It helps adults appreciate the diversity of our Jewish community, something that's not always so clear. It creates awareness of the importance of individualized attention because that benefits every child. It creates awareness of unique strengths and characteristics of learners. Every child we meet is going to struggle with something at some point, and through inclusion, we develop an atmosphere where that's okay and where we recognize unique strengths and challenges and that every learner has different characteristics. Inclusion teaches collaborative problem-solving skills and teamwork, and it helps all of us acquire different ways of perceiving challenges. I always suggest to teachers, whether you're formal educators or informal educators, congregational schools, day schools, camps, whatever it might be, to speak really openly about inclusion in your classroom. I like to integrate it into everything that I do when I'm working with kids. I like to tell them that everyone has unique strengths and weaknesses. This helps them when they find themselves having trouble with something. We talk about the fact that what's easy for you might be hard for someone else and vice versa. And lastly, one of my favorites, I like to tell kids I will treat everyone fairly, but I won't treat everyone the same because you are all different. I also suggest to teachers that you integrate it into your curriculum. Children need to understand from a very young age that every single person is to be valued, regardless of their individual strengths and weaknesses. As Rabbi Eliezer says, let other people's dignity be as precious to you as your own. This is an incredibly important teaching, and the only way that we can really model what we want our kids to know about being Jewish is to incorporate these ideals into our classrooms and into our camps and make sure that nobody is being left out. I thank you for joining this webinar. The more people who understand the power of inclusion, the more advocates we have in the Jewish community. And I welcome your questions or comments. Feel free to contact me at meredith@matankids.org. Thank you.